Hello, and welcome back to another Unreal Engine video. And today, I was in the mood for creating a material for buildable objects, basically. Yeah, that's basically what I wanted. So if you're new here, welcome. If you're rejoining, glad to have you back. Let's see. So, what we're doing today, as you can see, we have two boxes here. One is, both of them are dark blue, and so you can see they just look like regular static meshes and stuff like that. You're like, oh well, what are these boxes for, right? Well, this is what I'm about to go over in a second about how you can do it as well. So you'll see that they turned into ghosts. Huh. Well, if I pick up this gun, we can now build this right up. Look at that progress, 100%. We build this right up. It keeps going, 100%. There we go. So let me show you how I did it. And it's fairly simple, and it's a full complete system ready to go. So the first step in this whole project is to ding 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 get some gameplay tags going. Some of the best things ever. So set up a small little data table. I set up a small little data table here with two states, in progress and completed. Pretty self-explanatory. You can go ahead, set these up in your gameplay tags right there. And once you got those completed, let's move over to the materials. So I have two materials here. One is the ghost material, and the second one is the actual material when you complete the build. So this says buildable finished, but this can be whatever your material is for your object. The one that we're more concerned about is the ghost here. So the ghost. It's fairly simple, actually. Very simple. So this is just a basic material. I have the blend mode over here set to additive surface for the domain blend mode additive. I got a basic just color here going into a base color. I got a texture sample of this rainbow. This was actually built in. I don't, uh, yeah, if I just go ahead and just see here, texture, and look down here on the texture. Yeah, it was just like one of these built-in rainbow textures and whatnot, so that's what that is. You can use custom ones if you want. So the real how this really works, what we need to do is calculate the position based on a cut, like a cut in the mesh. And that's actually fairly easy to do using opacity and stuff. Um, yeah, and this is the whole algorithm basically. So it goes from your local position. So this is the local position, not the world position. So if it's not functioning correctly, it might look a little weird. Yeah, double check that this right here, this world is set the local, and that'll help you debug, because if it's set to world, sometimes it's a little weird. So yes, we'll need a parameter here, which is called mesh half height, because this local position goes off the gizmo location, which is in the middle. Um, of course, you'll probably have to make some slight modifications to this system if you have a custom mesh with the gizmo at the bottom. You can play around with it. We'll need one parameter here, a scalar parameter, a second scalar parameter for the cut plane location, basically. So that's how when we chop it off. You'll need a few constants, and then this feeds into and then all this stuff feeds into an if. So you take the local position, mesh half height, you add those together, and then you mask them on the blue channel, which is the z-axis, and this is a component mask here. So you can just grab that and fill out your component mask, collapse that up, and then yeah, this will feed into an if, so that mask will go into A. Your cut plane or whatever plane you're cutting it along goes into B. A zero constant goes into A greater than B, or equals these two, and then the one is going into B is greater than A, and that feeds into the opacity. And that's the whole material. And then we'll use a component to control these two variables, basically. So over in the components, we'll need to now control those things, right? I've got an interface here. This is just going to be this is just going to have her as, and this is going to have her change by amount. So it's just going to be a change by amount, basically it. In our component here, we've got a few variables. We've got the interface set up, and we've got a little small custom function here. So the variables that you'll need set up is a reference to the buildable actual buildable thing. So on the begin play, we'll get the owner as the buildable, and then we'll set the reference. And here, the buildable actor has an interface with a couple of methods on it. One of them is to just get the static mesh, not static mesh component. This is actually a primitive mesh component, so it can either accept a skeletal or a static mesh. So this is an interface call off of this actor. And what we're going to do is from that component, we're going to do a get bounds, which is basically going to get the local bounds of the box. If you're a little confused, if you can print that out and just see how it looks. The origin is actually slightly different. I believe box extent is local and origin is world. I believe that's how that works. So this basically just says to get the height of the z-axis according to the scale. And that's all that's going to do. And this is going to set a variable of max build amount, and then this will pass into a change update progress. So these variables, so we have the actor reference that we set up on the start here. We have our max build amount, which is going to be our max build that's scaled off of our height. We have our current build amount, our current state tag. These are read-only variables, so this is our percentage max, which just means 100. I needed a variable to be used in the calculations when we do this change and update progress, so this is just set to a constant 100. And then the ghost material, the reference for the ghost material here. And the current build amount does have a default value of 10. If you set this to 0, the material kind of behaves a little weird with a little bit of flickering. But I find if you just give it a little bit, it'll be all good to go. So we've got also the interface methods here for this component, which we had the as, which we set up for reference itself. We also have this change by amount. And this change by amount just simply feeds that amount into this method, which is going to be the main meat and potatoes of this component. Really, a lot of this is just a lot of pre-setup. So if we go into the update and change progress, this is of course where all the logic happens for us. So basically, this takes an amount, it will scale it, and then clamp it between the max percentage. So it'll take in whatever amount you send it. So if you send it 10, but the scaling is, if the height is like 50, it'll scale that amount according to the height, things like that. That's how you would do it. It took me a bit of debugging to figure this out, but that's how we configure what the current build amount is here. And of course, before we move through here, we want to just double check to make sure that we have a buildable state in progress here. So we set this up to just set it up here. This is also set to default in progress as well, because of course when you initially create it, it's in progress. So off of the buildable, we have a handful of other interface methods here. So one is to get the dynamic material, and I'll go over that in a minute when we move over to the actors. And then this is the mesh component here that we actually use to create the dynamic material. So here, we just pull whatever the last dynamic material is off of it. That's what that reference is for it. That way we can swap between materials. So here it'll take that the mesh component, or the next step, it'll take that mesh component and it'll just set the material to the ghost material. It will go through, on this dynamic material and this static this mesh component. And we're going to create a material instance off of this. And then off of this, we'll pull off and actually set those parameters in our material. And so the one is going to be set for the cut plane, which is going to be our current build amount. So how far we've built up. And then this will be our max build amount, which will be the half height, because it will calculate negative to the bottom of the mesh. It's a little weird. It did take me a bit of debugging to figure it out in print strings. That's why I have a couple of print strings here. And then we go into a branch condition, which either says on this condition is in progress or completed. And this Boolean comes from a check to see if the current build amount is greater than 100%, basically. If it's greater than 100, then say it's complete. If it's less than 100, say it's still in progress. And then off of that, we'll take our interface here for our object reference, and we will run a notify build complete, which will swap over the material to its completed form. That's all that does. So over in the interface, you can see here we have for the actor. So that's the basic component. In the event graph, we have we just pass it through on our buildable component. I'll show the event tick in a minute. That's pretty fun. And yeah, so that's the basic, like the core functionality of how this would work. Now moving over to the actual actor reference here, we can see that it has like the notify, it has the change build material. When we need to, I actually don't think we're using a new build material here in this case. I think I decided to do it a different way. But you definitely need the get, so that's the get material. You'll definitely need the build. Oh no, I think, yeah, because I think the notify was swapped out. It is what it is. So we get the mesh component, that's a mesh component. We do a build, which is basically the equivalent of what the other interface is doing, but instead this is gonna just pass along to the component basically. That's all this method is gonna do. And then of course we have the as. So let's move over to the actor here. So the actor here is a basic actor with a static mesh. This is where we get our cube, and you can set up a default material if you'd like here, just for giggles. And then you add your component. We add the component here on the begin play. We obviously set up the reference. Here's the notify where we set it to the default material, and that's where we do have a couple of variables in here, and the one is a default material, so whatever material this static mesh is going to use to be its completed state. We just have a quick reference for our current dynamic material, and then the buildable component here, reference. Go off of these actors, the notify build complete here. This is just going to set the material of this mesh to our default. We've got the change build material. If you want to use it, we can swap over to a new material. The buildable dynamic material reference is just going to do a get on this. It is just a get. It's just pulling the variable. This other get is also pulling the variable. This build is passing it to the component, which passes it to build by amount, which then builds by the amount, which then passes it into our massive calculation to figure out how far the material will need to be cut. And then, of course, the as to finish this off. And that's it. Yeah, that's pretty much it. And then that's how that works. It will automatically set up here, and it will build it up. Now, the building up pieces here is actually done by this projectile. On the event hit, we say, is it a buildable actor? We check the object reference, is it a valid object? And then we call that build, and we can pass in whatever amount we want. Here we're passing in 10, but because it's scaled to 50, it's gonna raise the amount by 5. Because if you see here on the cubes are 50, they're like 50 by 50, I think. So when you scale it, like you can see like the location here is 400 or whatever. So then divide that by 8 and you get 50 and stuff like that to figure out the calculation. But you can see it'll go up by 5 because that's how it's scaled. And of course, you can just pass in bigger values if you want it to scale faster. For example, I want to scale maybe by 50, which will in turn scale up by 25 based on the boxes here. Yep, there you go. Fun stuffs. So I hope you found that helpful. And hopefully you can do that. Same. Here's the reference back to the material. Remember, this is a component mask. These are input parameters and these are constants, and just a simple add with an if statement. You have their tags, you have your interfaces, and then you have your big component that handles all your logic. And we can just take, yep, where it handles all the clamping, the calculations for the scaling. This is where it does mostly the scaling here. So if you ever want to like modify that, that's where you would do it. Or is it here? Yeah, it's here because it's when it passes in this amount. It does a division based on the max percentage and then the max build amount and things like that, and then clamps it and then checks, make sure it's not in progress. And then yeah, it'll go through, call that interface method on our actual buildable object, and then it'll just do a couple of gets here for the dynamic material that we need to set up, and then the mesh component that we also need to use to set up, and then we set the material to a custom ghost material here, create the dynamic material instance according to that mesh component, which will automatically use this material. And then these will, of course, set up the amounts for how much you want to scale and control the texture material. And then we're printing out the progress, and then we check to see is it complete? Is the current build amount over 100? If it is, then complete and notify that your buildable was completed. Reset the material on your buildable, and you're finished. Yeah, hope you found that helpful. I had a little bit of fun doing this. All right, before we head out here, let's hook up this event tick. Why, shall we? Watch this. This is so I like doing this. I love working with event tick, even though like you can it can kind of eat into performance a little bit if you do it wrong, but this shouldn't. So, and get this out of the way. Let's see all these boxes on Eventic. This is so satisfying. To the moon. All right, guys. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.